This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Mac and Jack Saturday Debate Show. I am Jamie Pags, filling in for Mac. We have Dr. Paul and Hall of Fame boxing writer Jack Hirsch. Good morning, guys. How are you?
Doing great. How you doing, Pags?
Good morning, fellas.
I'm doing fantastic. I just have to say this first and foremost. Hey, Keith, did you see that game last night? Or were you too busy watching what real baseball looks like with other teams? Because your team was the team that screwed up there. You should have never ran in the ninth inning. That ball was much too shallow. But you're the team. Your team made the gaffe. I don't feel like watching the game today because I don't think the Mets play baseball the right way.
He's laughing
You're
at you
ridiculous.
now if he heard. Keith Hernandez is laughing at you now if he hears this. You want to know why? You know where he is today? He's with his team, the 1982 world champion St. Louis Cardinals. He's a Cardinal this weekend. So he's looking down.
He was a Cardinal. He was a much better Cardinal anyways than he ever was as a Met. Like I said, he was somebody who stepped in it twice because he had a great Cardinal team that he was the afterthought. They had a great Met team that he was the afterthought. He just happened to be on the teams. He was good at defense. He was so at the plate. That's all he is, and that's all he ever was. And like I said, both Ryan Howard, Mattingly, much better first baseman. And those were just the two that we spoke about. I'm sure we could go down the list of first basemen that were much better.
Much better. I don't
much
know the
better.
Word. I think we got.
I could almost put when I think of first baseman, just above him would probably be Andres Galarraga, and then you could start up from there. And I don't think Andres Galarraga was anything great either.
What about?
I think this is a little revisionist history, right? Maybe we're mad at Keith Hernandez. Maybe he said some things. I missed it, that he doesn't like the way the Phillies are playing. But
that is correct.
I think most people would say that Keith Hernandez was a pretty darn good first baseman. And I'm not a Mets fan or a Cardinals fan. And offensively, he's an all-around first baseman. I'll have to bring up the numbers here while you guys debate it. Keep going.
So
I brought up the numbers yesterday. He was a 296 hitter.
You assume everyone's watched all three shows at all. As someone who just tuning in today doesn't know why you're upset. You're upset because Keith Hernandez, who's now a Met broadcaster, said he does not want to broadcast any Philadelphia Philly games. He says it's nothing personal. He says the Phillies are not what baseball is all about. I'm paraphrasing. He says,
and he didn't say nothing. He didn't say that it wasn't personal.
Baseball.
He definitely made it personal.
They don't play good fundamental baseball. He doesn't appreciate their style of play. They bore him. He's bored watching the Phillies. Okay? So he doesn't feel like doing.
He didn't say he was bored. He said he didn't want to watch him. He doesn't like that style of baseball, that they don't play good defensive baseball. And because of that, he watch him. So ultimately, all he was trying to do was put a little, trying to get a rise out of Phillies fans and stuff like that to try to make himself relevant. Well, no, I mean, hey, listen, I'm easy to rile up. You want to try to trigger me? It's simple enough to try to do that. Just talk bad about my team for no reason whatsoever. I'm sure they put what he said on the wall. And you know what? Their ace yesterday didn't get a win. In fact, the last time we played against Scherzer and he pitched against the Phillies, they lost that game too. So, and the same thing with DeGrom. We actually beat those guys. It's when the other pitchers are pitching. When you don't have Scherzer or DeGrom on the mound, that's when the Phillies have the biggest problem, because for some reason or another, our pitchers pitch up to their level. We had Suarez yesterday pitch amazing. He pitched amazing. He outlasted Scherzer. Scherzer had over pitches by the seventh inning.
It doesn't bother Scherzer. You just have to look at his paycheck.
Without a doubt. Scherzer's a great pitcher.
He's not losing sleep. If the Mets are obviously going to make the playoffs, they're an absolute lock at this point. But the Phillies would be in the playoffs if the season ended today. They'd be one of the wild card teams ahead of the Brewers. They'd be
not only ahead of the Brewers, but ahead of the Padres. ahead of the Padres, which that was the one question. I knew that there was a question that I forgot to put on our list, but that's something that could possibly be talked about. First off, this 80-game suspension rule for taking these substances.
Fernando Tatis, yeah.
Tatis, and obviously, is it are the Padres doomed now because of what they gave away, and now that this guy's not even going to be back until the beginning of next year?
Answer me this question, guys, about human nature. Fernando Tatis signs a 14-year contract, close to $25 million a year. I think if he held out to free agency and let his skills play out, he could have done better. But I don't condemn him for that. That is major guaranteed money, 14-year deal. And why would he want to kind of screw things up? I mean, the money's guaranteed. Just do the best you can. And even if you're just a better than average player, not a great player, just play out the contract. And as long as you're doing the best you can. But these guys feel a need to, take PEDs as if their career's on the line. They're doing something desperate. He gets caught. He hurts his reputation. He's losing a half year's pay, not that he can't afford it if you look at the whole contract, but you just wonder. I mean, he reminds me with Robinson Cano. Had Robinson Cano just stayed a Yankee, signed a 7-year deal, he would have been in Monument Park by now. He would have been on track, perhaps for the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. But I don't put down Cano that badly because he had an extra $65 million for 3 years. He made a value judgment, but he lost some of that money with the PEDs, and his reputation is in tatters.
Right. But I think you have to ask the question, and I don't suppose to know the answer. But when a guy is caught with PEDs, the assumption is that he just started using them, right? Like, oh, well, how do we know that player X, whoever it might be, when he's caught, has just started using the PEDs? There's a possibility that person was using PEDs long ago, before they were even drafted. And that was sort of what they did to become the great player or the very good player that they are. That could be the reason that they excelled. That could be the reason they made it through the minor leagues. And for whatever reason, it just wasn't caught until a certain point. Right? Isn't that a fair assumption?
They beat this. You're basically saying, is painful as it would be to say, some of the guys may have beat the system by cheating. They may have really benefited it. It may have wound up being, I hate to say, a good thing they did for themselves. Cheating's never a good thing. But by taking it, they were able to get to a certain status and become wealthy and get a certain amount of prestige. And then it finally kind of caught up with them, but they already went ahead of the curve, more or less.
I think of it a little differently. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Paul. These guys all take supplements. Everybody in Major League Baseball, probably bar none, everybody one way or another takes a supplement. And in these supplements, aren't the supplements that we buy at GNC. These are supplements that are genetic, and they're very specified for each player because these guys have the money to do that. Even
you're talking about illegal supplements. Illegal.
No, I'm talking about legal supplements.
Legal. Nothing the matter with that. If it's legal,
see, so what happens is that Andes testosterone, we'll say, and Andes testosterone gets banned. They make it. They add a letter to it. They change the chemical slightly. They call it something different, and now that's not banned. That's why the banned list is so comprehensively long, because that they change the chemical makeup. The compound is a specific way, and that compound winds up getting banned. They change it slightly, just the way that it's made up, add maybe a hydrogen molecule or something like that into the mix. And now all of a sudden it's a different drug. It doesn't register on their list because you have to go through this. I can imagine that they are just a typical, piss test is what they're doing, that you have to take like a blood sample. of some sort to do a drug test.
Urine test.
It is urine. So I mean, I don't know how it is. I mean, I know that if you were to take, what was called Aquaman, that was a water retention pill for ladies that dealt with bloating. You take that, well, that helps get some of the water weight out of you. So now you're being more water than anything else. If you were to take that before you went into the piss test, what that does is, if you were to take
urine test.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry. I know I'm using improper wording here. But if you were to take that pill before you were to take your urinalysis, and also had creatine, so now you took Waterband and just took normal powdered creatine, it's going to show like you don't taking any supplement, because that's all that's going to show is the water and the creatine that goes through your body. And that's why I feel like you can get through some of this.
Well, you had, especially in track and field, there would be a way to mask it. It would all be about timing, when you could take certain things, how long it would be in your system, and the athletes would be linked with certain experts on it to get away with it. But of course, they'd occasionally miss the timeline and get caught. The most famous case was Ben Johnson's in 1988, got caught. Who knows how long Ben Johnson was on it, forging his reputation, winning the world championship.
Well, this is my point, right? The question is, when does it start in a player's career? And, the big question, when they were saying that, during the height of the steroid era in baseball, and they're saying, half of the players are using. How do you know which ones are the clean ones? How do you know which ones are the unclean ones? And the question I always had is like when the Mitchell report came out, which I don't feel was comprehensive at all. But when that came out, and you didn't just see superstars on the list, and you saw fringe players all over the place, you have to start saying, well, if the fringe players are using and the superstars are using, how can you assume that anybody else is clean? And I think that's, and Pags and I were going to discuss this a couple of weeks ago. That's where you get into this whole controversy about the Hall of Fame and who should be in and who shouldn't be in. Right? There are players that are in that most undoubtedly used. I mean, I don't have that proof, but you listen to the reports and you hear what other people say, and you look at the way their bodies change, and you go, yeah, they probably used. It's or undoubtedly, like, it seems pretty convincing. But this guy can't go in because that guy actually had a failed test. This guy, they just never caught him. And I think it just gets messy, because just because you didn't catch somebody doesn't mean they didn't use, right?
You don't know. That's guys, a big boxing match next weekend, major heavyweight fight. Anthony Joshua against Alexander Usyk. Usyk was a cruiserweight just about his whole career. He moved up to heavyweight for a couple of fights, beat Joshua. Now he looks big for the rematch. Very noticeably big, very noticeably bulked up. And this is a guy already, in his later 30s, who's been fighting for, so long, his whole life. And why? I know you get a little big as you get older, you tend to put on weight, but he's gotten extra big. And, and there have been whispers going around, no evidence on anything, but you're never going to see evidence. It's always going to be a certain suspicion. But sometimes someone can get naturally look a certain way without any supplements at all. I'll give you an example. Ken Norton. He had, he looked like Hercules. He had that type of body. And there was another fighter, Mike Weaver, who was nicknamed Hercules. These guys were all cut up. And this was in the 1970s. So steroids had nothing to do with it. Sometimes someone does have a natural build.
I'm just going to push back on that a little bit. I believe there were steroids in the 1960 Olympics. I believe that to be the case.
Bulk up? Athletes bulking up then.
Well, but they were using them. I believe I could look that up while
it was talk with the
weightlifters. And I remember in the 1972 movie The Longest Yard, that they were talking about how the inmates were going to face the cops or whatever, the wardens people and all that kind of stuff. And there was a line in there like, we can get anything. We can get steroids was one of the things they said. So this idea that steroids only came about in the 80s or into the 90s, in 1984, we're all big Rocky fans. I mean, part of the whole thing was that Drago was shooting up with steroids, right? And Rocky was doing it naturally.
I stand to be corrected. Okay, no, let me stand to be corrected. There wasn't testing then.
Oh, okay.
Same way.
Right. But what we're saying is how do we know, unfortunately, which guys are clean? That's my only question, is which guys aren't clean, and when did it really start, and who really used and who didn't use? So when you say, like, why would Fernando Tatis jeopardize it all, or why would Robbie Cano jeopardize it all? We don't know that they were thinking that way, because that might have been part of the way that they had trained their whole lives. I mean, I remember being in high school in the 80s, and there was a kid who was all of a sudden ginormous, and kids were saying that's steroids. And I remember, like, that was the first time I ever heard the word, and I was like, what did he do? Huh? You can just take a pill or get a shot and become ginormous? Like, obviously I didn't do that, but I mean, they've been around and accessible for a long time, longer than just right now. And so the question is, if some people are using, how do the clean guys, supposed clean guys, compete with the guys who aren't clean and maintain some type of equality with them, right? That's where the question comes, and that's where the concern comes with who's clean and who's not clean, and et cetera.
Doc, you would turn it down in a second, but I know as you were walking away, they'd say it would add 18 miles to your fastball and your leak. You would just stop and say 18 miles, and then you continue walking.
Yeah, I'd rather be slower.
Right.
Know that what I did was natural. Well, and look, if it came to putting stuff, we keep doing this, right? I would have gotten Rogaine a long time ago.
Yeah.
There you go.
Not putting that crazy stuff.
And how you doing, Rick, this morning? Like I said, the women were always suspected, and so were the men. I tell you, that was the one thing that the Russians were really good at, was designing some of these steroids. That some of the chemists that came over, when Bond started using the cream and the clear, when you didn't have to take a pill or take a shot, you were able to just on your arm, and it was starting to work that way. Like, those are the things, those designer steroids that came out specifically.
Yeah, I sometimes think of all these athletes who said they unknowingly took it, that someone gave it to them. If I'm a famous athlete and someone who's in charge of my conditioning, that, they gave me something illegal knowingly, and I didn't know about it, I'd probably sue them. They tarnished my whole reputation. I wouldn't just blow it off by saying, oh, I unknowingly took it. I mean, you mean to tell me they had no idea, no inkling?
They had an inkling. Obviously, the problem becomes is that when they're taking supplements, and these supplements are okay this year, but then they find that there's one ingredient within that supplement that needs to get banned. So now a supplement that they were taking, this is what happened with Lane Johnson. Lane Johnson last year, a couple of years ago with the NFL, he wound up getting suspended for, I think it was 8 games or 10 games, because he banned substance. But he was taking the same substance for the last 5 years. The NFL banned one of the ingredients within that substance. It showed up on his test, and of course he wound up getting banned. So now everybody's saying, oh, well, he's juicing. Well, he wasn't juicing. He was just doing the same thing he was doing every day. And one of those ingredients decided, the NFL felt was performance enhancing. The truth of the matter is that in those supplements, they're all performance enhancing. To take Adderall, when it was Carlos Ruiz, Chooch from the Phillies, he got suspended for taking Adderall. Now I take Adderall every day, because I have ADHD. He wasn't diagnosed with ADHD, so the fact that he was taking it and he was kind of self-medicating with it, even in a proper way, they looked at that as performance enhancing. And that's,
okay.
So as long as you have, so what did he do? He got the doctor to say, yeah, he needed it to him. So after take Adderall.
Well, I'm going to tell you, just transitioning, we talk about athletes, they take these things not just for performance, but to avoid injuries as well. And last night, in the NFL, the preseason game, they reportedly, supposedly play guys very little because they want to keep him healthy for the regular season. But look at Zach Wilson right off the bat, a knee injury. And if he has to miss the season, that's devastating for the Jets. Devastating.
And that was a non-contact injury. So he wound up getting hurt.
Injury. He didn't even get hit, but it just shows you, with athletes cutting. It just shows you the league. I mean, there've been other injuries as well, right off the bat. And it's and there's no real protection against that. I mean, if an athlete's going to go all out the way they have to, it happens. But yeah, but by the way, your Phillies, your Eagles lost to the Jets preseason game 24-21. I'm sure it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean much.
You know what does mean something to me? The fact that they scored 2 touchdowns on their first 2 drives, and it was 14-0 by the mid of the first quarter.
And Jalen Hurts
that was exactly all I needed to see. Because it's
what do you do
the Jets?
If the teams seem to get mired in these quarterback things, like the Giants with Daniel Jones, you only have like a very short window to decide if this is the guy you're going to keep or if this is the guy you're going to jettison. And if you have your second year quarterback like Zach Wilson, and if he's injured for the year, boy, oh boy, that really sets you back, way, way back, because now you're trying to see if he's the guy, but you lost a critical year in that very small window to decide if he's the guy you're going to stick with and he's going to be your franchise quarterback for the next 5, 8, 10 years.
It's so hard. It's so hard sometimes. That's a great point. The Jets, when they drafted Geno Smith, and I joke about Spider Rico, Geno Smith is still around, and supposedly he's starting. He's going to be the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, who are considered this year at least one of the weaker teams in football. And this is coming up with DUI, and he's been a backup for years, Geno Smith. And all of a sudden, he's going to be starting. But when the Jets drafted him, they went 8-8 that year. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure whether he should be the starting quarterback going forward. I just wasn't sure when the season ended. And as it turned out, he shouldn't have been and didn't hold on to the job for long, after when the next season began. But sometimes you don't know. Zach Wilson, if he's out this year, they drafted him number 2 overall in the draft. And what teams tend to do, they make an investment in a guy. And when you draft a guy number 2 overall, you can't just cut ties so quickly because you invested so much in him. I mean, have you ever invested anything in your whole life? It could be a business thing or this or that, and just turn around, say, oh, it was a bad deal, forget about it. You milk it out as far as it can go. But if he's injured, he's out this year, you've lost a whole year to evaluate him, and you still are not sure whether he's your guy. You could say, yeah, we think he's going to improve, but you could be wasting a few years, at a critical position.
Absolutely. But doesn't the maybe walk through this for people who don't quite understand, but usually I think it's like a 4 or 5 year window for a quarterback, correct? And then you have to franchise them or whatever, or right? They're talking about that with Daniel Jones.
Depending on where they're drafted, if they're a first round pick, they can be signed up to 5 years. Usually they sign 4 years with an option 5th year, so that gives the team that extra spot so that they would be able to re-sign them before they would have to start the franchise tag. Now, if you're drafted, I think it's past the 3rd round. If you're behind that, typically you're getting 3 and 4 year deals. You're not really going much further. That's what rookie deals kind of last for. And they don't have that option, which means that teams have to make a decision a little bit faster in those cases. For instance, with Hurts, I believe next year is when it's his final year of his contract, because he only had a 4-year deal because he was a 2nd round pick. I think it's the first, it may be just the 1st round that is the ones that have the biggest, they're the ones that usually get the 5-year deals, where everything else is just a 4-year deal or less. And so decisions do have to get made. For instance, with the Eagles specifically, Obviously, they had the whole Wentz debacle, and then Hurts took over, and he played okay at the end of that season that we're talking about, where Wentz wound up leaving, and they wound up being in last place. Last year, they make the playoffs. However, did they make the playoffs because of him, or because of the schedule, or because of the team in general? Hard to answer questions. So I feel that he has a half of a season to really figure out, whether he's going to be the guy or not. Now, after 10 games this year, if he's 8-2, obviously you have to start thinking about what you're going to do to re-sign him, because he's progressed well enough to be a good quarterback in this league. If it's 5-5 or 4-6, well, at that point, you have to really start to consider whether he is the man that you want to lead your team moving forward, because already that season seems to be a loss, even though there's still 7 games to be able to bring it back up to snuff.
But Pags. But the thing is with Hurts, let me just cut in on this. You have to look what the Eagles invested in him. He was a second-round draft choice. Let's make believe he was drafted where Zach Wilson was the number 2 player in the whole draft. Chances are they would stick with him longer if he was subpar.
That's like Wentz, like they did with Wentz.
Well, they
who was the number 2 pick in the draft?
And they did, yeah. They pushed Wentz as far as they could. I mean, if Wentz wasn't drafted,
actually, they re-signed Wentz. They gave Wentz a contract, and then wound up getting rid of him.
But Wentz performed. He was outstanding early in his career. There's a difference, and but in most cases, most quarterbacks in the NFL, most starters, the teams are hoping that quarterback's going to be their starter going forward, okay, for years to come. They're hopeful. It's not that they think they'll be like Daniel Jones on the Giants. The Giants hope, but they're not Sean Daniel Jones. Very few guys, even in the AFC East. Josh Allen, the Bills know he's going to be their starter going forward for years to come. Miami hopes Tua is going to be it. They're not sure. The Patriots hope Mac Jones is going to be it. They're not sure. The Jets hope Zach Wilson's going to be it. They're not sure. Right. And that's how it is in most quarterback positions.
Right, but the quarterback's such an important position. My point is you have this very small window, just a couple of years, to decide if this is the guy you're going to invest in long term. It used to be year to year, right? They didn't give long-term contracts, and they didn't have the franchise tags and things like this. This is my point. So you could say something like took Phil Simms, a whole bunch of years before he finally got into the groove and became a very good quarterback. You don't really have that option. It's really, do we cut this guy and go another direction after a couple of years, or do we invest in him for a longer period of time? And I think the Giants are up against it this year with Daniel Jones. Like, are we going to stick with him, or did we blow it and he's not really the quarterback we thought he was going to be when we drafted him, and then we start again from square one next year? And what I'm saying with Zach Wilson is, the jury's out on him. Obviously, he's young. He has shown some flashes of excellence, but he's young. And if he loses that critical second year, third year because of an injury, that really hurts a franchise, because it's not like, when there's a quarterback who's taken high in the draft, who's like a consensus pick as he's going to be a superstar, you're going to stick with that guy a little bit longer. You're like, everybody says this guy's going to be great. But when it's a questionable guy like Zach Wilson, you're like, maybe out of a small college.
But there are very few. Zach Wilson was the number 2 overall.
Correct, but was he the consensus pick as like the number 2 quarterback or the number 1 quarterback in the country? No, the Jets pulled him from a smaller school and we're taking a chance on him to start. So it becomes even a riskier venture if he's out for a year, because you have one fewer year to figure out if he's really going to be good in the NFL. It's just that's my point.
Yeah, it's hard. I a lot of misses.
And I agree with what you're saying. And I'll be 100% honest that I feel that the NFL in this regard should go back a little bit old school. usually rookie quarterbacks, it was very rare when a rookie quarterback would start right away.
Exactly.
It was not something that happened. You learned the speed of the game. You learned by carrying the clipboard 1 year so that you could get yourself established. And maybe even like later in that year, if your team wasn't doing well, and I think this is a la Andy Reid, where he had Doug Peterson as his quarterback for the first 9 games, and then he picked Nab out there.
I'm not a believer in that. I believe you learn by playing. I mean, Doc, you're like a principal, for example. A teacher learns by teaching. I can understand they sit in the back in the corner and they watch another teacher and you learn a little. That has value, a lot of value. I understand. But you got to get out there. You got to get out there and actually start teaching. You're going to make mistakes. You get through it. You learn by your mistakes and you become better that way. It's like, and Tom Landry, you mentioned quarterbacks, they used to sit. He used to have a philosophy, quarterbacks have to sit 5 years before they can start. That's ridiculous on reflection. And when he had Roger Staubach come to the Cowboys, he says, well, Staubach is more mature. He could just sit for 2 years. I mean, that's ludicrous.
Those are 2 important years, right? Those are, yeah.
That was important, but I think you learn by playing, unless you're very shaky in the beginning, because football is a complicated game. It really is. And unless you're ready to get out there and quarterback, you know the plays, you feel comfortable, it's better you maybe sit and have the clipboard a little while till you're truly ready. But some guys are set to step in. They want to play immediately. They can pick the playbook up. They can learn quickly. It's just a question of getting the experience and getting out there. Yeah, well, Eli Manning sat like about half the season, 9 games in the beginning. And then he finally got in there. He made his mistakes. And it's the question is, can you live with the mistakes the quarterback's going to make in the beginning? And is his confidence going to remain intact? If it is, you play him and he'll get better in time.
It's an interesting dilemma, no doubt about that. I want to give a quick shout out. I see Rick made a comment. We can see the comments. There it is. Dr. Paul, I bought your book this week. The Least Among Them, the book about the Yankees. Thank you. Haven't started it yet, but look forward to a good read. Thank you, Rick. I'm glad you picked up the book, and I hope you love it.
There you go.
You should do it. You should do a book, the Yankees who've been sent down and called up the most.
Oh, my God.
In history. Is Miguel Andujar maybe going to be one of the top guys on the list?
Steve Balboni. That was it. He was on the
Columbus Shuttle. Balboni. He was
good Balboni.
City, wasn't he?
Yeah, he led the league in, or at least I don't know if he led the league in homers, but he hit 30 or so a couple times. I'm going to look that up. Did Balboni ever lead the league in homers?
And Rick, you do make a good point there that the coaches don't really have that luxury to wait, that they are stuck making these decisions and they have to either, because in most cases, the quarterback is about to save the coach's job or lose the job. I mean, that's why we've been touting this with Cousins, that he's a coach killer, because he just cannot perform. He's a good enough quarterback that everybody feels like that you could be able to win something with him because he's got all those intangibles. But the truth of the matter is that he's a coach killer. I think of the best coach killer of all time, Jeff George. Good quarterback, a lot of talent, killed coaches because he just, he wasn't disciplined enough to do the same things over and over again, and that repetition while behind there. He had all the talent in the world, but could never really do anything with it because he was just a miserable and just thought he could do things without having to listen.
I'll just say it basically to end the topic. The biggest quarterback dilemma, I think, in the NFL right now is with the Baltimore Ravens with Lamar Jackson. They have to make a decision. If they're signing him, he's going to be one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL for the next few years. And once you make someone one of the highest paid players, you're completely committed to them. You can't look back. And if he's not quite your guy going forward, and it seems like they're not sure, they're like they've been on the fence a while. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Do you think they'll put some type of clause in there that he's got to do 4 hours of study, offsite?
No, well, that was pathetic. Yeah.
It's pathetic. And of course it got accentuated out because somebody reads these contracts. Obviously nobody read it beforehand, and there must have been something that occurred over that last 7 games when they were 11-1, and all of a sudden they all of a sudden, or last 5 games.
They took the clause out. I mean, one of the funniest things I ever heard, and I'm gonna tell you a Yankee story with Billy Martin when he was in the broadcast booth with Bill White. Bill White was having fun talking with Billy Martin about bonuses that players get, and Billy Martin was getting madder and madder because players didn't get bonuses in his day. They played hard for everything they had, and Bill White kept prodding him, and Billy Martin was getting mad and mad, and finally Billy Martin says, the guy gets to the team bus on time, and he gets a bonus. I was like cracking up. Like bonuses, like you play X amount of games. You're supposed to play the darn games. You're getting a bonus because you're playing games.
Right. The contract's to play game, right? That's
yeah. I mean,
well, so, and maybe that's a good question to ask. Should these contracts, especially with the way baseball is putting out these ridiculously numbered contracts where it seems like every player, the next player that signs has got to be higher than the previous player. So, you only are the highest paid player in baseball for about 2 minutes before the next guy gets signed. So, and every team's got to outdo each other because they want to show that they are behind their player more than anybody else. But should these contracts be more laden with these bonuses rather than giving them full, hey, we're going to pay you $50 million a year just because you're on our team. How about paying you $30 million and we're going to give you, we'll give you $5 million if you are in the top 5 of the MVP voting. If you are the, if you're the batting champion, if you have the best ERA in the league, most wins in the league. Should these contracts be set up a little bit more that way where it's more incentivized? So that they get the best out of the player in comparison to, hey, we're just going to pay you $50 million. And, in Tatis's case, hey, now you've done this, so you're going. So it's obviously he's not going to get paid for that time, so they get to recoup that money.
That wouldn't work. I'll tell you why. Because teams will look to save money if someone is in the top 10 in the RBI race. Let's say that's in their contract. They tend to sit guys out at times. It's
I don't know that teams would be able to really do that. I mean, because one, they still have to answer to a fan base. Two, that would start to, that would come out because obviously they're like, hey, they're not playing me because they don't want me to hit my bonus. And that all of a sudden
has come out. That
has happened over the years. You've heard stuff like that.
So, and I got to imagine that usually the fans are backing the player and not the owner.
I tell you, so most of the players, the vast majority, have a lot of pride. Even any guaranteed deal they have, they're going to play hard. They're going to want to do well, and they also have to answer to their teammates if they let up a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's a problem in the vast majority of cases.
Well, let's talk about somebody who's about to get a new contract here real soon. We'll go to our actual questions that we prepped ourselves for. The question here is every time Aaron Judge hits a home run, it's headlines. Now, is this unfair to his teammates because he's getting all the attention? If they maybe even had a better game than him, which is, I feel like right now the Yankees aren't having good games at all, and he's probably the only one that's really overperforming, or at least the one we only hear about overperforming. So what are your thoughts on whether it's unfair to the rest of the Yankees that Aaron Judge is the one that's getting all the attention?
I think it is. I really do. Like about a week ago or so, Josh Donaldson, who's been struggling a little this year, he hit a home run. Got 3 hits, 3 RBIs. In the same game, Aaron Judge hit a home run, got 2 hits, 2 RBIs. The headline is Aaron Judge's homer. Now, I can understand if we're making a big deal of Aaron Judge and comparing him to Roger Maris, per se. That's like half and half who holds the home run record. I can understand, closing in on Maris. He hits number 57. Maris is at 61, and you want to say that's the real record. But come on, it would annoy me. Last night, for example, Judge hits a homer. Yankees lose 3-2. I mean, first thing I see, Judge hit a homer. Well, Clay Holmes blew the save. You know, I mean, Clay Holmes, I'm sure, is happy Judge is getting the headline on that. There's no jealousy there when you perform like that. But let's say a player's performing well. If I'm a player, I've gotten 3 hits and 2 RBIs. Judge gets 1 hit, a home run, 1 RBI. I feel I've done better. I want to get a little recognition myself. I just feel it's unfair. It's a team game. You don't want to focus on one player unless all factors are equal. Then this is Aaron Judge. But listen, he's just getting too much of the headlines. The Yankees can win 6-1. Aaron Judge could hit 1 home run. A pitcher could pitch a masterpiece. Aaron Judge gets the headline. I just don't like it. And I wouldn't like it if I were a player. I don't think I would hold it against Aaron Judge personally. He doesn't make the headlines, but I would be resentful about the situation.
Yeah, I'll disagree. I think we wrote in the pregame discussions that I'm disagreeing with you on that. I don't think most of the players care. I got to be honest. They go out and they do their job and they do whatever they can. And right now, if you're the Yankees, the only person really worth talking about is Aaron Judge. And there's a story there, right? There's the big story. What's going to happen to Aaron Judge at the end of the year? And Aaron Judge is going to be a free agent. And he turned down a big offer from the Yankees and, decided to bet on himself. That's the big story. And so that story was going to carry itself. The minute he said, I'm not signing that contract, that was going to be the story this year. That Aaron Judge bet on himself, and he bet on himself, and he's winning. He's doing a great job. He's having an astronomically great season, and so the feeling is that he bet on himself, and he's winning, and look what he's proving. He's showing what a great player he is. Those headlines would have been the exact opposite if Judge were having a bad year. Judge bet on himself, and he's not doing well. Look how terrible! How could you turn down that kind of money and put up a terrible performance like this? So that is the story. And it's not just Judge, the first guy ever to have this happen. I mean, there's the famous story of Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig hit 4 home runs in one game, and he came home, and the headline was John McGraw retires, because the longtime manager of the New York Giants, I guess, announced that day that he was retiring, and so he got the front page. And I can even tell you a quick story about Roy White. Went to Japan. Roy White had a huge game. I think he hit 3 home runs. And he was a switch hitter. So 2 lefty and 1 righty, and helped the Yomiuri Giants win a big game. But on that same game, Sadahara O hit his home run to pass Hank Aaron, and Sadahara O got the headlines in Japan. I just think if, you're the big star and something big happens, that becomes the story. And that's what people want to read about. The person tuning into the newspaper is going to get excited by the headline that says Aaron Judge or Reggie Jackson or something big like that. They're not going to go buy the newspaper if it says Isaiah Kiner-Falefa went 4 for 4. They're just
no, Doc. The example, I don't think is spot on, because I'll tell you why. Sadahara passed Hank Aaron, so that's historic. That's okay to get the headline over someone else hitting 3 homers in a game. 4 homers in a game is wow. That is unbelievable. That's a rarity. But John McGraw, a legendary manager, just happened to retire. So that's big news. I mean, that's major news. Both other things that got the headline. But Aaron Judge just hitting another home run. It wasn't a historic home run. If it was home run number 61, 62, for example, and someone else hit 3 homers in a game and Judge hit 1, yeah, give Judge the headline. But
yeah,
Judge
I just don't
the headline every game.
Yeah, I just don't. I think because it sells papers, right? I don't think the players resent it. They know that it's a business selling papers or getting people to tune into blogs or ESPN or whatever it might be. And again, people aren't going to tune in if the headline says Jose Trevino or Isaiah Kiner-Falefa or even Anthony Rizzo. They're going to tune in if it says Aaron Judge. That's Reggie said, I put fannies in the seats, right? That's what Reggie was big for. And Greg Nettles could hit 5 home runs. They wouldn't. How did Reggie do? That was always the talk, right? How did Reggie do? How did DiMaggio during his streak? Did DiMaggio have a hit? Nobody cared if Tommy Henrik had a hit.
No, it's funny. Actually, fans don't realize when Reggie came out for the Yankees the first year, Nettles hit more home runs than Reggie in the regular season.
Actually, I think they tied, didn't they, in 77, 37 each?
I think he hit 32 to 27. Nettles beat him by 5, I think, that first season.
Did he? Nettles led the league in 76 with 32, but Reggie's first year was 77. I'll look it up. And by the way, Steve Alboni, because I looked up the other stuff, never led the league in homers, but he hit 36 one year. I thought Nettles and Reggie tied in 77. We're going to find out right now. You did. You're right. You are right. Nettles hit 37 and Reggie hit 32. Jack is always correct. Good job.
No, I was off on the amount.
I was 5. I was 5. So, and I wasn't, much of a fan at that point. Like I said, I was a fan of Mr. October just because he had the nickname and my birthday's in October. So, who I share a birthday with, Keith Hernandez, the loudmouth from the Mets. So,
it comes full circle.
If you want to get back at Keith Hernandez, we were talking contracts. You could mention the deal he signed with Cleveland at the end of his career. He was a free agent. It was meaningful money at the time. He got $3.5 million for 2 years to sign with the Indians. It was meaningful money then. Once again, now it's like utility man money. But they said the GM of the Indians, I don't remember who it was, says we overpaid, but we signed Keith for his leadership. And Hernandez played something like
46 games. 46.
I don't know how many games. 46, whatever. You hardly
only because I looked up his stuff yesterday.
How many? 46 with the Indians.
46, and that was it. And then he retired. So
yeah,
I mean, he wasn't that great, and it's like I said, he was a good defensive player. He happened to be on some good teams. If he was such a great player with the rest of the talent that was on those teams, they would have won more championships. That's what I got to say. So if he was such a transcendent player that it would be so much better, then he would have won. He would have more rings, but he doesn't.
No, well, listen, he's been on 2 championship teams, Cardinals, Mets. Come on, I mean.
Yeah, like I said, let's talk about who was on that Mets team. There was Darryl Strawberry, who I hear Doc has got some stories about. We have
a story.
Pax didn't know your story, Doc, with Darryl Strawberry showing up at your school.
Oh,
did he ever?
Yeah, real quick, Pax. This is just great. I retired this year, and a teacher was able to reach Darryl Strawberry and just tell him a little about me and the job I did as a principal, and hopefully, said lots of nice things, all modesty aside, right? And Darryl heard my story and he said, I got to meet this guy. And so he came to my school free. He didn't charge anything. He came to my school to meet me and thank me for my service, and then have a catch with me in front of all the kids and the teachers and everybody. And then he welcomed all the kids onto the field. We took a big picture together, and he probably stayed for an hour and surprised me in my office. I was sitting there talking to a bunch of teachers, and Darryl Strawberry walked in. It was one of the great moments ever. And so it was really, really, really something special. So yeah.
Did you find yourself tongue-tied when you saw him in the office?
I didn't know what to say.
Like you choked up a little bit.
And so I'm like, hi, Mr. Strawberry. I mean, he's instantly recognizable.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing I said to him was, do you remember when you hit that home run in Shea when you were on the Yankees and they put the apple up?
Yeah.
The apple came up halfway.
Sometimes you get someone of major star quality. They come over to you and you lose all poise. You're so shocked. You're flustered. Okay. Like we had a boxing writers dinner, and Oscar De La Hoya came up to me to hang out. And I'm more like flustered. I never met him before. Like, what do I say? Like, I'm like, bumbling all my words.
Yeah, it was great. He couldn't have been more of a gentleman and couldn't have been more kind to me, the teachers, the kids. It was really one of those magical moments in life.
And he's a great example of someone turning their life around. I read this book where Strawberry was profiled as one of the Mets players, the bad guys won. And he was one of the bad guys starting fights with teammates, this and that. So it's really nice to see a guy really turn his life around in a good way, try to, help other people. And
he actually wrote a book about that, talking about how he found Christ and how he turned his whole life around. And it's a fascinating book, and he doesn't pull any punches about himself and the mistakes he made and how that helped him grow as a person.
He didn't pull any punches in the Jeter documentary. I don't know whether Pags didn't see it. I don't know whether you saw it, Doc, but they replay the Armando Benitez thing hitting Tino Martinez in the back, and there's a whole brawl, and he came up and he got Benitez with a good punch. And you see Joe Torre, who's Strawberry, loves getting Strawberry out of there.
Well, and I think of, I from what I understand, that Doc Gooden was such a bad influence on certain people, and that may have been cause that you just can't play with certain people, and maybe that's how he needed to find Christ.
I don't know. I won't say that. I don't think Darryl ever blamed Gooden for any of his difficulties.
I don't think. I can't imagine that he would, because ultimately you have to be responsible for your own doing, and especially when you have a coming to Christ. And I again, that's that you got to be able to take responsibility for your own actions. You can't blame somebody else.
I think what turned Darryl Strawberry's life around, and I don't mean to be funny with this, becoming a New York Yankee. All of a sudden, he was in a situation of great structure. The Mets, as great a team as they had for one, well, they won a World Series one year. They should have won more. They were disorganized, dysfunctional group, always battling amongst themselves. And all of a sudden, you had to do things the Yankee way. He comes over to the Yankees. George Steinbrenner gives him another chance. He towed the line. He listened. He was a great team guy with the Yankees. He helped Jeter a lot, trying to advise Jeter, how to, not to make the mistakes he had. He kind of in a way took Jeter under his wing, and Jeter always appreciated that. And he revered Joe Torre, Darryl Strawberry, by all accounts. And he kind of started doing things the right way, and it just seemed to continue better and better. And that story with you, Doc, it's a great reflection on the type of person he is.
It was amazing. Yes. It was amazing and magical, and I can't thank him enough for coming out of his way to see me and have a catch with me.
Well, Doc bailed him out. He threw one ball in the dirt to Doc. Doc scooped it up to save them. The embarrassment of a bad throw, too. I'm sure Darryl appreciates that more than anything.
Yeah, I can imagine that he lived with that. Like, where did that throw come from? I can't believe such things. And but I think that this actually goes to our second question before we go to our break, since we have a little bit of time before our break. Obviously, Darryl Strawberry, who I feel that the best thing that came from Darryl Strawberry was the Darryl chant, because ultimately I still use that for a lot of different players, and it gets under their skin, something horrible. And you could tell that it would get under his skin all the time, too. But he actually wound up saving his legacy, and that certain players are very conscious of the fact that they have a legacy that they are going to leave behind. Do you feel that keeping that a player staying with one team cements their legacy better? Because you guys have it. Is a player's legacy hurt by switching from one team to another? And I like to ask it a little differently. Does it cement better if he stays with one team rather than switching?
Guys, it could, but I don't think it's that important. We're talking about all sports here. Peyton Manning, he was a Colt all the years. He went to Denver. He has two legacies, winning Super Bowls with the Colts, the Broncos. Tom Brady has two legacies. He's going to be thought of as a Patriot primarily. The great Yogi Berra, 9 at-bats with the Mets. No, and he managed the Mets, went to other teams, managed, coached, the Houston Astros as well. Everyone thinks of him as being a Yankee. Jeter mentions he only wanted to be with one team. Brett Gardner didn't want to go anywhere else but just be a Yankee his whole career. The case of John Smoltz, Hall of Fame pitcher. Atlanta wouldn't sign him after he was in the league. Wow, 18, 19 years or something like that. And they let him go to Boston over a very little money, and he pitched very little for Boston. Does that change anything at all? I mean, Babe Ruth, didn't he play for the Pittsburgh Pirates?
No, Boston Braves.
Boston Braves. I'm sorry, hit 3 homers. Was that against the Pirates?
It was against the Pirates, I believe.
Against the Pirates.
Forbes Field,
sorry.
right? Wasn't that in Forbes Field? I think so.
Yeah, I had a moment, but the idea he went to a different team at the end. Willie Mays went to the Mets, maybe because it's New York and the Mets were takeoff for the New York Giants. People thought it was.
I think Aaron went to the Brewers, right?
But it was Milwaukee.
Yeah, right. But so same idea.
Way, yeah. I don't think it does, but it could. But with that said, let's make believe we were all players, and we had a great career with the team. There's something to be said for spending your whole career with one team. Jorge Posada, 17 years with the Yankees. I think he had a chance to go to Miami had he really wanted to. But players tend to think, look, I'm at the end of the line. I've been with one team my whole career. I'd rather not go at the end. Let me just retire with my team. I think it depends on the individual, what it means to him. But to us on the outside, I don't think it means that much.
And doesn't Wade Boggs fall into that category too? He got traded before he got to the 3,000s hit, and I remember in the press conference he says, "Yeah, we're going to put the counter up in the stadium to where you count me down." And I was like, "Really? You're that full of yourself?"
No. Wade Boggs was a Yankee for 5 years. That's hard to believe.
Then he got his 3,000th hit with the Tampa Bay Devil Rays.
Tampa Bay. So he was away from the Red Sox for quite a while. He wasn't just away. Yeah. So he had a kind of a Yankee legacy as a 1996 World Series champion.
And just as I think of the same way. Like obviously, Cal Ripken could never play anywhere else because he was the Iron Man of the Orioles, and ultimately that had to be cemented in. Mike Schmidt, same type of situation. You can't really see him being anywhere else, and that is part of their legacy. Where certain players you don't like. Bonds, Bonds' legacy didn't matter where he played because he was such a great player wherever he went.
Pittsburgh and the Giants, there's only 2 places, Bonds.
I think. But I'm saying that he went on, and obviously when he was out in San Francisco, I mean, he got a lot bigger and hit a lot more home runs. Bonilla, Bobby Bonilla, I mean, I know him as a Pittsburgh Pirate, really. I mean, that's what he played. He played as a Pirate. But I mean, you get Bobby Bonilla Day as the Mets with the Mets.
Yeah.
So he's more, his legacy is more as a Met than it ever was as a Pittsburgh Pirate because he gets Bobby Bonilla Day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's, you think of all the legacies to have, maybe that's the best one to have. The fact that you've been getting paid for all these years, and it seems like it's never going to end.
Well, I'll give you better. You being a Philly guy, and Doc can answer this too. Curt Schilling had a legacy with 3 teams, the Phillies, the Diamondbacks, and the Red Sox. What do we think of him as?
Me personally, I think of him as a Red Philly.
I think of him as a Red Sox. You think of him as a Philly. Split legacy. That could be a good thing for the player involved. That
I think
more than one legacy.
When it's a guy who plays his whole career for one team, that does say something, right? It cements him as that team forever. DiMaggio is always a Yankee. Gehrig's always a Yankee. Sam Musial's always a Cardinal. Ted Williams is always a Red Sox. Cal Ripken, Mike Schmidt. Jackie Robinson, right? Just a Dodger, right? He was traded to the Giants and then he retired. So I think it adds something to that team's history and it puts them a little bit different. But as far as the player, if you're a great player, I don't think people ever think you're a lesser player because you played on a different team. They don't say Ricky Anderson wasn't great because he played on 52 teams. Ricky Anderson's a great player. Reggie played on 4 different teams. Nobody says he wasn't a great player. I guess if you have to count the A's twice, right? But you just think about a lot of players who played on a lot of different teams. It doesn't take away from their legacy.
So
I think it adds a different.
With the Angels and Orioles, Yankees, and Athletics.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, yeah, thank you.
But you think of like I've heard just like Mark McGwire.
Ted Williams. Guys, Ted Williams carried it to an extreme. George Steinbrenner offered him a job as a hitting coach, tried to recruit him, and Ted Williams said he just couldn't do it. But Ted Williams was associated, guys, with another team. He managed
the Senators.
So he did have a tiny legacy, not directly as a player, but when you manage you're forging a leg.
Joe DiMaggio coached with the Oakland A's, didn't he, for a couple of years?
Oh, right. Good one. I forgot that. Wow. But he was an
Oakland
I
don't think coaching counts.
He lived in Oakland. He came from the Oakland there, the Bay Area.
San Francisco, yeah.
So it was all one of the same when you're there. Yeah, good one, DiMaggio.
So,
the guy of DiMaggio's stature worked as a coach. You kind of won. In this day and age, I couldn't see an icon like a Jeter, for example. I couldn't see him as a first base coach. I just couldn't see it.
Well, you know what? Because I'm going to mention this name, this would be a good teaser for after the break. Because if we're talking about cementing legacies and things of that nature, I mean, obviously, Pete Rose was a fantastic Red, became a Philly, was a fantastic Philly, went back to the Reds and was a coach manager over there for a long time. And obviously, his legacy has nothing to do with what happened on the baseball field. His legacy is now the fact that he gambled on baseball. So let's go to a commercial break. We're going to leave it right there as our teaser because he was going to be our next question anyways. So we'll be able to kind of set people up for that as we come back from the break, talking about all the stuff that Pete Rose did, not only in his career, but most recently as well. So we'll be back right after these commercial messages.
The Hometown Foundation is excited to bring back the Dream Ride experience, August 26th to the 28th at Connecticut's Farmington Polo Club. Join us in celebrating the accomplishments of our Dream Riders while enjoying live music, a car and motorcycle show, family fun zone, pet adoptions, canine demonstrations, the Fireman's Chili Cook-Off, and much, much more. Get your tickets today.
Mr. Green?
Yeah.
You need any help?
Mm-mm.
I just want you to know, I think you're the best ever.
Yeah, sure.
Want my Coke? It's okay, you can have it.
No.
Really, you can have it.
Okay.
A Coke and a smile makes me feel good, makes me feel nice.
See you around.
That's the way it should be. I like to say,
Hey, kid.
the whole world is smiling with me. Coca-Cola as life. Have a Coke
Wow,
and
thanks, Mean Joe.
smile.
You know, one of the best things about being an ex-big leaguer is getting freebies to the game. Call the front office, bingo. And once these fans recognize me, I probably won't even have to pay for my light beer from Miller. Down it, crack! I love them. These fans know I drink light because it's less filling and it tastes great. Good seats, huh?
You're in the wrong seat, buddy. Come on.
Oh, I must be in the front row.
Come on.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer and less.
Good seats, hey, buddy. He missed the tag. He missed the tag.
Trisha's having a sleepover tonight. Can I go?
I wonder about Lucy's friends. What should I say? I know you're only 10, but one of these days a friend will offer you a drink. And alcohol at your age can lead to so many things. None of them good.
So can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me
I
something.
finished my homework.
Bigger promise. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, "No thanks, not my thing."
Mom.
I promise you. Your real friends won't care. Deal?
Sure.
Really?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
I mean, you can see right now, without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboy fan is here, so I had to make sure he knew how much I hate this team.
I'm ready.
I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem saying it to his face.
Oh, I'm from Brooklyn.
Hey, get it each.
And welcome back to the McKay Debate Show. We left off before the commercial break, just talking about, Pete Rose and how his legacy has been, we'll say, tarnished because of the way that everything has occurred. Like I said, that he was a great player, but that doesn't matter anymore because he is also a gambler, and that's really where his legacy has been left with. And obviously, we had a 1980 reunion for the Phillies, and he was invited to be on the field. It was actually one of the things requested by both Larry Bowa and Mike Schmidt, that said that they would not have won that World Series without Pete Rose, and that they would not have a good celebration without him. So he was invited. And then, of course, he went up to the booth, and maybe they really shouldn't have invited him up to that booth because he gets to talk. And then, of course, he was asked by a reporter some questions, at which he had a very unique answer, a response to that, and that he, due to those things, the question arises that did what Pete Rose do take away from what the Phillies were trying to do in honoring the 1980 team?
I don't think, fellas, it's what Pete Rose did as much as the reporter asking it, taking away from it. Let me just state that Pete Rose, to me, isn't a nice guy. And I find it horrible, these accusations, if they're true, it all, what went down. I find it appalling, okay? But we're talking about 50 years ago. Time doesn't diminish how terrible a thing it could be. But there's certain times you don't want to make it the centerpiece of attention because it's unfair to the other players over there from the 1980 championship team. They're there for a celebration. And the time to ask Pete Rose that would be before, be after, get an exclusive interview, attack him in headlines if you want, but don't do it in that particular weekend. I mean, you mentioned Mike Schmidt and Larry Bowa. They're coming there for a celebration, as are the other players. And that's what the focus should have been on that afternoon, okay? Not what a lousy individual Pete Rose is or what lousy things he did before, what terrible things he did before. If it was new news coming out for the first time, that's fair game. That's okay. But this is old news, as bad as it's been, and I'm not saying it should be forgotten. I'm just saying for that particular afternoon, it had no place as being, a centerpiece. And that's what I kind of object to. I think the reporter could have had better timing. I think reporters can have better timing. And I think the timing wasn't good to go after Pete Rose with that, because now what's the headline of that whole afternoon? Pete Rose, the way he answered the question, he answered a female reporter by saying, babe. That's outdated. That's demeaning. You don't say, hey, babe, to a woman reporter. So right there, Pete Rose, he lost people just by that remark, And then reportedly, offering to sign 1,000 autographed balls or whatever to try to make good. Maybe he was sincere in trying to apologize to the reporter, offering to sign baseballs. I don't know. But in any event, let's focus on the 1980 Philly championship team, the ones that beat the Royals in 6 games to win the World Series, the one that was down, I think, 5-2 in the 9th inning to the Astros in the deciding elimination game, who came back, was it the 8th and 9th inning? I don't remember, but came back and beat the Astros in dramatic fashion. And they went to the World Series and won it. What Pete Rose allegedly did would have been terrible. There's no dispute there, and that shouldn't be diminished. But for this one particular afternoon, that short window of a few hours when the 1980 Philly championship is being honored, that shouldn't have been made the main focus by a reporter who could have asked those questions that tracked Rose down at just about any other time.
Doc?
Yeah, I'm going to basically agree. I didn't see any of that. But there's a time and a place, right, for questioning. And if you're at an event that's supposedly celebrating, or this was celebrating a significant thing, really the discussion at that point should be around the thing that everybody is celebrating. And it's all about the 1980 Philly World Championship. So that's what really should have been what people were talking about at that point, right? I agree with you, Jack. If something new had come up, maybe you're like, this just broke, let's talk about it. But to bring up old allegations about a person or not that, and again, if what the allegations are said are true, it's terrible. But I think, there's a time and a place, and this wasn't the time nor the place. And, Pete Rose is a lightning rod, right? He's somebody that commands all the attention. You're talking about Aaron Judge before. But by always making Pete Rose the attention at a thing like this, it does take away on something that we're supposed to be celebratory of an entire team. So with the question before, like, does that take away from the other players? I think it does. I think it took away, or takes away from the recognition that some of those other guys deserve to get for being part of a world championship team.
Let me just say something. Pete Rose is his great teammate Johnny Bench, okay? Maybe the best player Pete Rose arguably ever played with. Johnny Bench was bit about that because Johnny Bench said when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, the first thing reporters would say to him is, "Congratulations, John." The second thing they'd say to him, "Do you think Pete Rose belongs in the Hall of Fame?"
Exact same point, right?
Yeah.
Those moments should have been for Johnny Bench.
Yeah.
Right? And Joe Morgan, same thing when he went in, the great Reds, they deserve their moment in the spotlight and not have it taken away by questions about what Pete Rose did or didn't do. Right? There's a time and a place, and the time when somebody gets in the Hall of Fame that's the time to celebrate them.
But so my question then becomes is that, because you said that there's a time and a place, the truth of the matter is that Pete Rose isn't in the public spotlight, probably doesn't do many interviews without knowing everything that's coming with that interview. And ultimately you had somebody, because we're in a whole different world now, it's always got to be something political and always got to be something that brings up a controversy, because this writer is trying to get on the map the same way as Pete Rose is already on the map. So by asking that question, she's gotten more press about her this last 2 weeks than she's probably ever had, because all she did was ask a question, because you're not going to be able to talk to Pete Rose beforehand. He doesn't come out. Baseball doesn't allow him out to do this. You have to get special permission for him to be able to attend these events. So you're not going to see him out in the public eye very often. And when he's doing, you're not getting many reporters that are going to there to be able to ask him a bunch of questions. You may have even a couple of people who are doing some boycotting, but you're not having the news about the boycotts of that. You're just hear that he's there, because wherever he goes, he sparks an interest and he makes news. Just like I said, he got a few boos, but it was primarily lots of cheers for Pete Rose.
I'm not sure that the report. Let me put it another way. I'm not questioning the reporter's sincerity. I'm not thinking in terms of reporter wants to make a name for herself. She asked what she thought was a valid question. I just thought it wasn't the right time, basically. And Pete Rose's answer was, well, it happened 55 years ago. I'm not sure is his timeline completely accurate when he says 55 years. But then he uses the term babe to her. That's kind of, to a woman reporter, that's condescending. Okay, it's condescending. And I think he either realized that on his own or was told that afterwards. And then to try to make nice that I'm going to sign autographed baseballs, that doesn't quite do it, even though Rose may have been sincere, thinking that'll make it up in some way. That was condescending as well. I'm going to sign some, baseballs. And Rose could have handled it better by just saying, look, it was a lot of years ago. This isn't the place to discuss it. We can talk about this another time, but not this weekend. We'll talk about it another time. And then if he doesn't want to talk about it another time, then don't or whatever. But there was a way for Rose to have handled it better himself, obviously.
Yeah, Rose is not a sympathetic figure in this. I'm not talking about Pete Rose in particular. I'm talking about the idea of there are times and situations to ask people questions, and there's times to not ask them questions, right? There'd be a time to ask anybody in a situation about something that happened during their career or their life. If Pete Rose, it's a sexual harassment allegation. I don't even know what it's all about, to be honest.
No, what happened, supposedly he had relations with an underage girl when
terrible.
Rose was married with 2 kids. Yeah, absolutely. It's horrendous if true. I mean, Rose claims she wasn't underage by law, but the point is, you're talking about approximately 50 years ago in a very serious matter, and the amount of years you have doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to him about it anymore. Seriously reprimand him, whatever repercussions comes Rose's way. It's terrible. Okay, what went on, no matter how many years ago. But the point is, for those few hours, it's celebrating the 1980 Philly championship team. Go after Rose right before that. Go after him after those few hours. But the few hours, you're celebrating the championship team. So who are you hurting? You're hurting at that moment the other players who were there to celebrate their accomplishment. That's the only thing. It just wasn't the place to ask Rose. Some people say you could ask him in any place at all. I think he could have been asked the day before. He could have been asked the day after. And keep chasing him for that, if that's the case. But it's a sensitive area, and I'm sure some people will be critical of what I'm saying. Well, you should be able to ask him at every moment. I just don't feel, it's the time, those few hours, out of respect to the other players being honored.
Well, do you think that and that always comes back to the reporter. So ultimately, obviously, his answer was, yep. First of all, I'll preface this with, you're right. Pete Rose is a curmudgeon, and he's like the old grandpa who's set in his ways, who says the wrong and inappropriate thing all the time and can't get over himself. He can't get around it. It's just he's going to be inappropriate all the time. And that's just the way he is, because he just doesn't care. But ultimately, the girl who also didn't care that it was the 1980 World Series team that got honored. That's exactly it. Had she given any care and any thought to that, and if the Phillies were smart enough to be able to make sure to only ask baseball questions, that would have possibly been what happened. But no, she didn't care about the 1980 because she wanted to get the question out. And obviously the Phillies weren't on top of it enough to be able to make sure that it was only about the 1980 team and nothing about the fact that he gambled or the fact that he had this affair back in the day. That's, because it was a different world back then. This girl who was, barely 30 years old back then. So she doesn't know what the life was like back then. And not saying that it made it any easier, but in the process of all this.
The allegations are true. It's horrendous what Pete Rose did. It's a crime what he did. He was never convicted of the crime. I had to go to court. It's awful. But the point is, something that happened about 50 years ago, I'm not saying it shouldn't be discussed, unnecessarily brought up, or Rose shouldn't be condemned for it. I mean, that's another issue. I'm talking about the span of the few hours for the 1980 Philly championship team. I'm trying to give an example. Let's say the Buffalo Bills had won a Super Bowl during O.J. Simpson's time. Let's just make believe. And they're having a reunion, let's say 40 years later. And Simpson is there. I don't think you speak to him, about for those few hours out of respect to the other players. You don't throw the question about, the other thing that went on in his life that obviously people are deeply offended by.
Well, and I agree. I feel like, but that's under the discretion more of the writer or the reporter than anybody else. And the team itself has got to be really in tune with what's happening and know that you need to be around this guy to make
but
sure.
It happened. You want to know something? I'll be honest about it. It happened so long ago that I don't think the team would have even been prepared for that question because it hasn't even been talked about, it seems, for decades. The only thing they talk about, Rose, is gambling on baseball in the Hall of Fame. So I could see that catching the team off guard.
Does it make sense then when a team does something like this, as they do with other figures when they're speaking in public, to say these are the questions, or you have to hand in your questions ahead of time, or these are the only talking points we're going to allow. So maybe that's how the team should handle a situation like this, right? The Yankees just had Old Timers Day, right? And every year when teams do stuff like that, I'm sure they invite players back who have stories and things like that, and out of respect for the moment or whatever, they focus on the celebratory part, and the other stuff comes at a different point. Maybe that's the way teams have to handle things like this. They say at this event, the questions we're going to ask are these things. We're not going to ask other stuff.
I'll give you another example, Doc. Let's say a couple of your favorite all-time Yankees, Greg Nettles and Roy White. Let's make believe the Yankees had a day for them and they brought back their old teammates, and Fritz Peterson is there. To me, it's off limits. You don't ask him about these, the scandal at the time, which, the wife swapping thing. That wouldn't be the place for it. And if they started talking to Peterson about it, White and Nettles would be completely forgotten. Even though it was their day, that wouldn't be the headline anymore that they deserve to be.
Well, I mean, as much as I agree with that whole line of questioning, that thought process, because you're trying to honor something else, again, it's not, for instance, and I'm going to go the opposite side of this. The Phillies bring back Steve Carlton frequently enough. I'll tell you, Steve Carlton's also, in general, he's not nice. I'll also tell you that there's not many times that he is not, he is most of the time not very lucid because of what he does on a daily basis anymore. I'm not going to go into any detail because I don't want to talk bad about somebody, and make something like that. The Phillies have somebody around him all the time, so that when he's out in public, that and he's representing the Phillies have somebody there to make sure that everything is okay. That's just the way they have to deal with things, because ultimately they do not want him to look bad or the Phillies to look bad. And there's a lot of potential when that happens. He's revered in Philadelphia. He's probably the best pitcher the Phillies have ever had. That's never going to go away. The Phillies never want that tarnished, even though personally he may not be the best guy. I feel that the Phillies are the ones that probably could have done better, knowing that what's the possibility of dealing with Pete Rose? That he doesn't get involved in base. If he was involved in baseball all the time, these questions would come out all the time. But he doesn't get to come out in the spotlight as much anymore. And when you're in the spotlight like this, you want to be able to ask these questions because it's important in those regards. And I feel that that's part of some of the stuff that was happening here. That they could have did better. So him going, go on to and talk about, hey, we got this fastball, and I knew John Kruk when he had both of his parts and things of that nature. Like, he was way out of line with just the way he spoke in general. And that's where I feel that it didn't matter. The Phillies needed to be a little bit more in tune, and it didn't matter what questions, because obviously you didn't want to talk about the gambling either. Because, again, anything that detracts from what you're trying to do with the 1980 scandal or 1980 World Series, everything else is a scandal. And that scandal is always going to be what dictates the news. The fact that he did all these things is what everybody's talking about now, not the fact that the Phillies honored the 1980 team.
Have the Phillies honored the 2008 team yet, or they're going to do it at some point?
I'm sure they will. My expectation is
a little more recent, 14 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably say in 28 is when they'll do that.
Yeah.
You may try to do something next year with it being 15 years, doing like a 5-year reunion and such like that.
What was it, the 83 76ers?
Yes.
Were they 83? So
1983.
Yeah, would be 40 years.
That is correct.
Yeah, so maybe bring Dr.
And 1980. I mean, we're talking. It's 42 years ago that they're not honoring the 1980 team. They didn't get a chance to do it in 2020 because of the pandemic. So that's why they decided to do it in 42 years. But I mean, I like the fact that they did it. It was good to see all the Phillies back, because they brought not just that team, but they honored a lot of the Phillies. Any of the Phillies that were there was a slew of them that weren't on that team that were also being honored and represented with that. So there's a lot. The Phillies kind of said, hey, we're trying to bring everybody back that we can. And the Phillies have the longest history in baseball. I will say this. This is another thing that nobody really knows about because nobody's paying attention well enough except myself. The Phillies are 3 wins away from winning their 10,000th game.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So that's something that I happen to know because I just did some research on it, because I know that we are also we have over 11,000 losses. So
okay, I don't think anyone outside of you really pays attention to franchises' wins and losses over the history. I think fans are just into a recent, thing, what a team does. I mean, fans in general now, what have you done for me lately? For example, the Washington National fans seem to be a little upset with their team, and they won a World Series not that long ago. I mean, just enjoy that darn thing for the decade. They got to the top, so even if they're not winning now, just enjoy the baseball and be happy you got there.
Well, the problem is that whole team now is dismantled. The whole entire team, like any great player that you had that was a national, is now gone. And
Steven Strasburg, he's been out. He's still part of the team.
He is still part of the team, but he hasn't pitched.
No one talks about him.
Yeah, because obviously he's always injured. I don't even know what's going on with him. I just have no clue
about him.
Yeah, it's like you'd have to try to even put him, like you'd have to Google him just to see what's going on, if he's even relevant anymore. Yeah, because like I said, I haven't heard anything about.
Why? I mean, they've lost. They lost Scherzer, they lost Harper, they lost Anthony Rendon. I mean, they re-signed Strasburg at big money, you know, but that backfired.
Yeah, and I'm seeing how many games he's played this year.
I don't think he's pitched this year.
He's 0-1 this year with a 13.5 ERA. He was one game. He started one game, 4.2 innings pitched. That's it.
And that was in the beginning of the year, I would think, right?
I think so. So, I mean, obviously he's not doing much of anything, right? You know, but I mean, who knows why he's out? It doesn't really say here, and I haven't, you know, I could go down the list to see if there was anything specific put about him, but quite literally, it says, where is he now? Yeah, he's just saying that he's here, but he's just plays hurt. So, and he's making $35 million. So he's making a ton of money.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter because he gets paid and whether he pitches or not. And he's got his ring. So does Scherzer.
Yeah.
You know, so does all those guys. And of course, Harper does not because he wasn't on that team. But, you know, such is life. I guess that's the way the cookie crumbles sometime. Yeah, you know what? Let's stick, you know, just because this has been reporting lately, so we might as well bring up this next question. I'm jumping from one to the other. Will Kevin Durant be a Brooklyn Net when the NBA season begins?
My answer is I think yes. I mean, a lot of people assuming no, but Durant has 4 years left on his deal. Nets can call his bluff. Okay. And when this, you know, they could call his bluff. And what's Durant going to do? Not report? Saying, I'm going to sit out unless you trade me. And then the Nets could decide, we're not trading you. You're going to sit out. He's missing money. I think Durant thinks of himself as being a legacy player. And when you think of yourself as being a legacy player, you don't want to sit out. You want to get out there and play. And I think that's what it's going to come down to. I think Durant is going to show up, play for the Nets, let the Nets know he's not happy, maybe tune out the coach. I don't mean he's going to curse at Steve Nash, anyone, or the GM Sean Marks, but maybe just not talk to those guys, basically. Do what the coach tells him to, but give him the cold shoulder and just basically do his thing and be indifferent. Okay, be indifferent. Then Kyrie's going to come back to the Nets, and maybe they might decide, you know, we're going to play hard. We're going to put it together. We're going to win. You never know what dynamic is going to unfold because I think there's more at stake for Kyrie next year than Durant because Kyrie wants a new contract. He has a deal next year with the Nets. He opted in because no one else would have picked up Kyrie or signed him to a long-term deal. And for him to get the long-term deal, Kyrie knows he has to respond with a great year and show he's a real team player. And I think he's going to do it for the money, for the contract. I think he's going to buy in and play hard. And I think Durant, who follows Kyrie, is going to come on board. Now, but the question is, they got to start the year's Nets for that to happen. And the question is, will the Nets trade Durant before the trade deadline? I don't think so. Okay, because I don't think the Nets are going to quite get the package they want. The closest they're going to do is get Jaylen Brown, a wonderful player. Maybe Boston adds on a couple of picks. And unless the Nets get Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, and a couple of number ones or something, I can't see it happening. I mean, I think he starts the year as a Brooklyn Net.
So have you heard anything that came from Philadelphia? Because obviously now he's been linked to Philadelphia, and he said out loud that Philadelphia is. And hey, if it was just Maxey for Durant, I would do it in a second. As much as I love Maxey, I think that he's going to be a real big star in this league. Ultimately, I feel that for Durant, I would absolutely do it. And, you know, maybe you just kind of tell Maxey, hey, Maxey, we want you back here after you become a free agent. So, you know, maybe if you're interested, just get the free agency, and we'll be more than happy to have you come back, because I think that he wouldn't matter. You would definitely, absolutely trade him. And like I said, you would probably have to trade Matisse Thybulle. You would maybe even have to trade, who am I thinking of? Tobias Harris as well, along with 3 draft picks or 4 draft picks.
And that's someone Tobias Harris's contract. That's a contract that nails him down to the player. I don't think that high on Tobias Harris. Anyone is.
I can't answer that question. I can't answer that question at all, really. But I know that they're going to need something in return, and that's what the Sixers are going to be able to have to offer. That they're going to say, hey, well, we have Tobias Harris, we've got Matisse Thybulle, we have Maxey, and then you run into the same problem with Simmons and Maxey over there. Who's going to be the one that carries up the ball? You're going to make Simmons be that guy, or are you going to let Maxey do it?
Simmons going to even play?
Well, I don't know. I think that once you've removed everybody else from that team, you have no choice but to have him play. He's going to have to play. And I can't say whether he's going to play or not. Like I said, I feel a very specific way about Simmons. I feel that Simmons likes what basketball can give him, but not necessarily care about what he does in basketball. That he just likes the prestige that basketball can give and the money that basketball can give, but he doesn't care. And that's what it comes down to. He's lazy. He's got millenniumitis and does not want to play. And that's his problem, where he could be a great player. He could be one of those guys that, would have Hall of Fame career. He just doesn't want to. He doesn't want to because he just doesn't want to play. And everybody who was in the Nets, that they thought that this was the best deal ever, that they were getting rid of a problem in Harden, and that we were going to miss Ben Simmons, that he was going to go up there and he was going to be the answer for them. Well, they're still waiting for that, for him to answer the phone, because he doesn't want to do that, or he takes himself out of those text messages so that he doesn't have to deal with anybody in the process. So I find it funny.
Okay, so the question is, Durant going to be in net when the season starts? I say yes. What do you say?
I say no. And I don't know, but I think that the rest of the league in general are waiting to find out what happens with Durant. Like everybody else is operating off of the fact that Durant is still.
You're thinking in terms that the Nets are going to make the best deal they can get for Durant. I don't think they're going to do that. They're only going to make a deal that's a good deal for Durant. They're not just going to take the best offer. If the best offer doesn't measure up, they're not going to do it. I mean, he's been linked to Phoenix. Unless Devin Booker's part of that deal, they're not going to do it. Okay,
I agree.
And why would another team want to give one of their star players and add Durant? They're not really gaining. They want to get around trading their star players and give the best to the rest. Okay, let's say it was the Milwaukee Bucks, make believe. They would trade a Chris Middleton, a Drew Holiday, but they're not going to trade a Giannis for him, no way, shape, or form. I mean,
right, absolutely. You couldn't trade Giannis for him, and that wouldn't work, because you're trying to win a championship, so you don't trade the big pieces that you have.
Jaylen Brown you could trade, because you have Jason Tatum, Durant slots in that spot. And maybe they do add Marcus Smart, but the Boston Celtic draft picks probably aren't going to be low enough for you to want to make the deal, because they're going to have good records the next few years.
So right, but you could also go 7 years out, so and not protect them, because at that point you're like, hey, listen, in 5 years, 6 years, and 7 years, I want those first round draft picks. I want them unprotected, and it's like a switch on whatever pick is the better pick I want. So you get to make all of those assessments. I don't care whatever picks you have. The best pick you have is what I get of that year. So if it happens to be somebody else's pick that you want to wind up acquiring because you made a different trade, I want that pick. And you have the ability. They put that type of verbiage in these trades now, that you could have the best possible pick available that team has to offer from that year. And that's where I think that some of that's going to occur.
Very few teams are going to trade one of their stars. Now, I kind of wonder if the Nets call the Pelicans, would they part with Zion Williamson for Durant? You kind of like wonder. And that's something, if I were the Nets, there's a good chance I would do it. I would take a chance on Zion. Young, going to be a great player if he stays healthy. But then you kind of wonder about his motivation, even though they just signed him to a big deal, the Pelicans. But certain other teams, I mean, how many of them are going to trade, their key player? And they're going to have to do that, to get him. That the Atlanta Hawks, are they going to part with Trae Young, for example? A talent like that. The Mavs aren't going to part with like a Luka, Denver, Jokic. I mean, they're just not going to, do with these teams. They want to get Durant for all their secondary guys. Would the Timberwolves call it, let's say, Anthony Edwards? Would they part with him? Would they part with a Karl Anthony Towns? No, I don't think so. A D'Angelo Russell, they would, but the Nets already had him, and who cares? D'Angelo Russell isn't value for Durant.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like that's part of the issue, is that nobody is going to give up their star player, and that they have to work this out specifically with draft picks and extra players. That's the only reason why I feel that the Sixers even have a sniff in this, because Maxey is one of these guys that could possibly be a superstar. But the fact that he's not a superstar right this second is part of the equation, that he is projecting now to be this guy who is a really great guy who was found 22nd in the draft.
The Scotty Barnes, with Toronto, who's been linked to this too. So that would definitely perk the Nets, interest. But the thing with the Nets, they're not going to do it player for player with Durant. They're playing hardball. They're going to want extra pieces, and that's how the teams range it. Look, the Nets could call the Clippers and say, we're going to trade you Durant for Kawhi Leonard. Leonard, great player when he has it all together, but he's a question mark. What's his attitude and health status going to be?
Right. And that's part of it. Like Kawhi Leonard is great if you don't play him in the regular season and only have him play in the playoffs. Yeah. That's exactly how Toronto used him. He played 30 games in the regular season. Played like the last 12 games and then was ready for the playoffs. And actually it worked for them, and he wound up winning them a championship in Toronto. Ultimately on his own back, quite literally, because I had the Sixers won that game, where it was the quadruple doink that went in. Had they not had, Sixers likely would have won. It went into overtime. And they could, that was the time where I thought that they were really prime to win a championship, because I felt like everything fell into place for that. Didn't happen because Kawhi Leonard made the shot. After that 4 bounces, it goes in. And ultimately, that's history. That's history for them. And everybody knew that was why Kawhi was up there, that they needed him for the playoffs. They did that load management thing. They didn't care that he wasn't playing. They just needed him to get into the playoffs. Once they were in the playoffs, that he was able to go off, and he won the championship for them.
Yeah.
So
okay, so we disagree. You feel he won't be in that when the season starts, and I feel
I do not.
And we'll see. We'll see.
We will. Last question for the day. It says more and more we're seeing teams inner fighting amongst themselves during practice. And does this indicate a lack of discipline on the team's part?
Yeah, it does, because during the games, you're going to get penalized. And coaches keep stressing not to get these silly penalties. And players are getting frustrated. And if you're getting frustrated in practice, you can't keep it together then. How are you going to act in a game? The whole idea of this practice is to do what you're going to do in the game, execute what you're going to do in a game. And if you feel a guy's holding you too much, maybe taking a little bit of a cheap shot. I mean, fighting your own teammate, what's it going to get you? Because what your teammates doing to you in practice, it's going to happen to you with the opposition during the game. So how are you going to respond? Are you going to say, well, even though I'm fighting in practice, I won't do this during the game? But you are going to do it during the game. It shows a real lack of discipline when players are going at it. And it happens because of frustration, because one of the units isn't doing as well as they want to do. So they start fighting. And they also tend, I think, maybe to hurt team morale because they make it offense against defense, okay, in these training camps in football. And one unit shouldn't want to diminish the other unit because you need the other unit in order to win. If you're on offense, and you can't do anything against the defense of your team, I can understand the defense being happy that they're dominating in practice, they're doing their thing. They could dominate during the game, but if the offense doesn't have that confidence to execute, it's going to hurt during the game. So all your good defensive work during the game, or some of it at least, is going to be for naught. You're not going to win. So I think it's definitely a lack of discipline. These teams that fight, they're really good teams. I can understand a minor little scuffle between two guys now and then. That's human. But I don't think, I don't think it's good.
So Rick says that heat and competition play a role and that they're fighting for money. I don't necessarily agree with the second part of that statement, but I do
competition,
the competition is a big deal. And I disagree with you wholeheartedly on this. I don't think that the inner fighting is something that transcends onto the field for regular season games. I think that when you're in camp and you're fighting with each other, that just shows the competition. I mean, we're talking about this. Josh Allen got into one of the defensive linemen's face after he got too close or got pushed a certain way, and everybody got involved with this. I feel that that's something that galvanizes a team rather than breaks it up. I don't look at it as cancer. I look at this as, hey, that when you're with your family, when you're with your brothers, you fight. And obviously, when I'm with my brothers, if my brother and I is fighting with each other and we're going to blows, you better not step in, because the moment somebody gets involved who's not my brother and wants to choose one side or another, both of us will probably turn on that guy. So, because that obviously family is always family. And everybody else who wants to just get involved and get stepped in on family business doesn't deserve to be there or shouldn't be there. And I feel that this is the same way on a practice field, that you are all part of the same team, but you want to be better and you want to make sure that you are doing everything that you can. Plus, it's 100 degrees out and you got pads on and you're in practice and you're miserable just because it's training camp and you're not happy about being in training camp. That fights in training camp have been happening for years, many years. I mean, that was the big deal, that there was fights all the time that would occur, between different players at training camp. It galvanizes you as a team. It puts you together. I'm a firm believer that a team that drinks together and a team that hangs together wins together. You have to like each other. You have to have that camaraderie, that certain respect level that comes when you're fighting with your brother. Because obviously, one team one person wins, one loses. Somebody's on maybe the other brothers come in to break it up and such like that. It's not really a matter of that. It's more a matter of the competition level that you have and what you're doing with that other person. So do I think that because Josh Allen got into an argument or a fight, a pushing match with the defensive lineman, that I think that Josh Allen, that means that Josh Allen is not, that he's too much, he's got a discipline problem? No.
Yes, it is a factor. Okay, it means Josh Allen can lose his cool during a regular season game, playoff game, because the opposition can get inside his head. That's what practice is. The defense flustered Josh Allen. Whatever the defense did to Josh Allen in practice, the Buffalo Bill defense, his own team, the opposition is going to do something similar. And what's Josh Allen going to do during the game? He's going to get mad, start arguing with the play on the defensive unit, get in his face, go back and forth, and not focus on what he has to do. I mean, I understand quarterbacks play with emotion, but they've got to play with a level head. I mean, it's not a defensive lineman who has to play smart, but can let emotion be his main thing to get to the quarterback or the ball carrier. It's different with a quarterback. Certain positions, having too much emotion can actually hurt. Let's say a field goal kicker. He's all fired up for the game. Too much emotion could be bad for a field goal kicker because he's got to be calm and concentrate. Same thing with a quarterback to a large degree. And I just don't like the idea of losing your cool and fighting because flags are thrown immediately. Your team is going to get penalized in a big spot. So I think it's a negative thing.
I disagree. I think, like I said, I feel that it just what you're talking about doesn't necessarily transcend to the field. That this is something, because this type of fighting that happens at these camps are first in-house. You know what I mean? They're in-house fighting. And of course, we get to see them because that's the only thing that really happens worthwhile in practice. That, hey, there was an argument between two guys and, they were fighting and it had to be broken up. That just shows me that there's spirit happening at these practices, that these aren't just walkthroughs where somebody is going to be doing whatever. I mean, for instance, the fight that happened in Eagles camp was that A.J. Brown and Darius Slay caught a ball at the exact same time. And A.J. Brown was stronger and pulled the ball out of Slay's hands. And literally, it was a simultaneous catch. Brown wound up with the ball. They wound up coming together and arguing and doing some shoving back and forth. Slay says that it was an interception. Brown said, no, it ain't, because who's got the ball? And that was the end of it. Truth of the matter is that they're both competitors. They're both high-end players. And to have that type of spirit and the fact that they went into arguments about it and they needed to be separated just kind of expresses to me the level of competition that they've got now with each other to be able to put that onto the field with somebody else. I think
I can understand a certain play like you just described, them going at it a little, they get separated quickly. I can kind of understand that. I'm thinking more, on the offensive and defensive line. That's where the scuffles normally take place a lot of the time. No, I shouldn't say that. It does take place between cornerback and wide receiver too. But, whatever the other guy is throwing at you, that's what you're going to get during the game. And you got to feel, how are you going to react during the game? Did you do anything that could cause the referee to throw a flag? Okay? And the thing that the coaches hate most is a flag is thrown because a player's just lost his cool. Okay, it's one thing you're playing with enthusiasm. There's a late hit. You hate stuff like that. You hate any penalties, but especially the ones where guys insisting on fighting and you give the ref no alternative but to throw the flag.
Well, like I said, I think that those types of flags, obviously, there isn't much fighting that happens between teams in games. That there may be, the referee gets in there and there may be a scuffle that lasts a little longer, some trash talking where the guys start to come together and, could possibly be an issue. But
one of the plays in NFL history where there was a flag, came to mind, and it involved Lenny Dawson, former Super Bowl winning quarterback, was MVP Super Bowl for the Kansas City Chiefs. He's 87 years old. He's in hospital. He just got put in hospice, so he's like in our thoughts. The one play that happened with when the Oakland Raiders and Kansas City Chiefs used to have this fierce rivalry. It's forgotten in time. But Lenny Dawson wrapped up one game. He did a bootleg play. Game was over. First down. Raiders couldn't stop the clock. But at the end of the play, Ben Davidson did a forward roll on Lenny Dawson's back. They call a flag. Otis Taylor, the chief wide receiver, grabs Ben Davidson and starts beating on him because of what he did to his quarterback. So they throw a flag for that, and it was called offsetting penalties, where they had to do the play over again. And now the Chiefs didn't get a first down. They have to punt, and the Raiders tied the game on the field goal, and it stood a tie. They had to, they didn't have the overtimes in regular season at that moment, at that point in time. And they changed the rules because of the injustice of that. But we're talking about losing your cool. You tend to want to protect players on your team too. That's when a lot of flags are thrown, especially there's certain no-nos in camp. Josh Allen's like gold. Any player on the Buffalo Bills who goes after Josh Allen, they're going to tick off the coaching staff. The coaching staff isn't going to tolerate anyone messing with a franchise quarterback. So certain guys above it, they've got to be left alone. And it's up to Josh Allen. He's got to understand himself. You can't lose your cool with any of your guys because you're protected as it is by the coaching staff. And even the guys on defense understand on the Bills, don't hit Josh Allen too hard. We need this guy. Okay? He's our most important guy.
Right. Well, and Josh Allen was the one that got involved with this. So obviously it was something that he did that made that all occur, because obviously when he's the one that's fired up and he's the one that's getting in the face of the defensive lineman, that's the defensive lineman's only going to stand up for himself. So ultimately, and that's why everybody gets involved, because you don't want that to escalate to something that can't be stopped. And literally, Josh Allen said after the fact that he was specifically, just competing, that it was just in the heat of the moment.
That's usually it. Yeah.
And it's hot out, and it's these guys are miserable. It's happening towards the end of that day's practice, and it starts to get a little heated. Quite literally, pun intended there. And ultimately, you wind up having some of your emotions flare up, and you get a little argument back and forth. Again, I feel that that's good for a team. That shows the spirit that the team has, that they want to be the best that they can be, and that without that behind them, if you're not having those types of things, the practices are just really glorified walkthroughs. So that's why I think you see fights in camp more frequently than not. And of course, they're the ones being reported on, because it's practice. We're talking about practice, not a game.
Let me ask you this, because we have very little time left, okay? Joe Flacco was with the Eagles last year.
No, Jets last year.
No, I mean the year before. He was with the Eagles for a little bit, right?
Correct.
Right.
They traded him to the Jets, actually.
Right, exactly. Traded him back. He went from the Jets to the Eagles, back to the Jets.
Correct.
Okay, he's if Zach Wilson is out for the year, Joe Flacco is projected to be the starter. I don't think he has much in the tank at all.
You might as well call it Vinny Testaverde. Call it Vinny Testaverde. Call up Vinny Testaverde. He might have
got Mike White, their third string quarterback, played a great game, but it's alarming. Teams really got to invest in backup quarterbacks a little more than they have. I don't think they fully realize, a lot of them, how important the backup quarterback is. I think in the Jets' case, they're miscalculating. They think Joe Flacco can be very effective for them. I think he's past his prime. But
I think I'd be willing to bet that
Zach Wilson is, okay, and he doesn't miss much time.
I think if Zach Wilson is out for any length of time, the Jets will then become the front runner behind Cleveland on the Garoppolo front. That's who I would then go after. I would go after Garoppolo and see what you can get and how you'd be able to get him, because he's got. There's no way that he's going to be able to be the backup over there, and that's right now they're talking about Cleveland, because if Deshaun Watson winds up getting more time than just the 8 games, they're going to have to put an investment into that. So I feel that either way, that could really happen in that regards. But Hey, that's it for today. We've got just about a minute left before we go over. Real quickly, I just wanted to hit this. So Rick asked about Mac. Mac should hopefully be back within the next week or so. He's doing well, and I know that everybody misses him. I wanted to make sure that we did let everybody know that we do get asked a lot about it, and he knows everything that's happening, and he does appreciate all of the support from not only the listeners but all of us here at Northeast Streaming Sports. So I just wanted to give a few seconds of time to that specifically. That he may be back sooner than later. Maybe to Jack's chagrin, because
we all miss him. I mean, I look forward to seeing Mac again, even though he's a lot hard on me than you are.
I can appreciate that. So everybody, thank you very much for tuning in today. And we will be back on next Thursday. Or actually tomorrow with This Week in Sports. So everybody have a great weekend and take